Welcome everyone to Workshop 4. I'm very glad you could make this, talking about changing your negative core beliefs. It's really important to understand that a lot of body dysmorphic disorder, again, there's no one single cause for body dysmorphic disorder. There's multiple causes, but especially for me and for a lot of people, childhood trauma can really be a very serious cause. For me, when I had BDD, I thought that once I had gotten over the symptoms of BDD using talk therapy and Prozac, and I felt like my obsessive thoughts were under control. I wasn't having obsessive thoughts. I wasn't depressed. My anxiety levels had dropped a lot. Both the medication and the therapy really helped with that after about 2 years, but I still didn't really feel good about myself. And I didn't feel like I had fully recovered from what had really caused the BDD in the first place. That's what I really want to talk about, are these negative core beliefs that a lot of people with BDD have that can be caused by childhood trauma. What I want to focus on first, however, is how important it is to really understand that you're all really wonderful, worthwhile people. And you all have this inner light inside of you, which means something that is so valuable. You want to share it with the world. I know you may not believe that right now. We'll talk about kind of ongoing future goals for oneself in workshop 6 when we talk about success and setbacks. But I really want you to think about how important it is what you're doing, even with these workshops and showing up and learning these coping strategies. There are many, many Facebook groups for people with BDD. Most of the groups that I visited and joined just to observe the posts are people really focusing only on their problems. And I want to say it's really important, and I'm not dissuading anyone from sharing out your problems and getting empathy and hearing about other people's problems so you can feel less alone with your BDD. I think that's truly important for people with BDD to feel less alone. But I don't think it should stop there. I really feel that people need to understand that there's a way out. That's what I want to do with my workshops, with my support group, with my story. Let people know that there's hope, that they can recover from BDD. So the fact that you're here and the fact that you want to recover and you're looking for that light and that hope is really, really something you should take into account and really appreciate in yourself. That you're really someone who's looking for a solution, not only focusing on the problem. There is an ancient Chinese proverb, and this was a favorite of my mom's because my dad was a very negative person. He always talked about what was wrong with his life, with everyone else's life. He complained a lot. And my mother's favorite expression to counter that, because my mom really tried to be a positive, optimistic light in our lives for my brother and I, is it is better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. The image on the left kind of shows that single candle being lit, and I think that's representative of everyone with BDD really seeking that inner light within themselves. But I also feel like the image with the heart really is what happens in my support group and what I feel is happening in these workshops, which is when we all share our own light and you let your own light shine and everyone comes together, we can really support each other and really understand how wonderful each of you are and how we just form this community, this BDD community of support. So I really want you to take that in to think about that tonight as we're going into some of these deeper, darker places within ourselves. This is part of a very famous quote from Marianne Williamson, who wrote Return to Love. And it's something that I really cherish and I want to, again, share out as we're looking into some of the darker areas of ourselves. But I also want you to know that there's this inner light, this beauty, this purpose that you have as a human being. So here is what she says. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I want you to just take a deep breath and to sit with that and to understand the work you're doing today, the work you're doing in these workshops, liberating yourself from your BDD bully. You will be able to bring that positive energy and the light within yourself to other people so that you can be a positive force in the future. Now, our core beliefs pretty much shape who we are, and it shapes our experience in this world. Core beliefs are generalized global beliefs about yourself, your future, or the world around you. Core beliefs impact your self-concept, your feelings, and your behaviors. Core beliefs are formed from childhood memories. Core beliefs can be positive, neutral, or negative. Again, these are coming from Sabine Wilhelm's book, Feeling Good About How You Look. This also, the next quote is from Mahatma Gandhi, and he actually didn't say, be the change you want to see in the world. This is actually the correct quote that is, because the other quote is attributed to him a lot. This is actually what he said. And the reason I like this is coming back to the power of our core beliefs shape everything. It shapes how we see ourselves, the story we tell ourselves about who we are in this world. But it also shapes how other people see us and how we impact other people's lives. So it's both, our core beliefs are both internal to us, but they're also external to how we impact other people in this world. So this is Mahatma Gandhi. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. This is the divine mystery supreme. A wonderful thing it is, and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do. Meaning that we can change our existence simply by changing ourselves and our own core beliefs. We don't have to wait for other people to change. We don't have to want or make other people change to make ourselves feel better. We have control over our world and our feelings and our beliefs. That's what I want you to take in as we go on and talk about negative core beliefs. And unfortunately, many people with BDD have very strong negative core beliefs about themselves, which then also gets translated into negative beliefs about other people, about loved ones, about strangers, and about the world itself and how we relate to the world around us. It's important to note, especially when we think about what I mentioned in the first workshop about the amygdala and amygdala kind of, the fight, flight, or freeze. A lot of that comes from traumatic experiences in our childhood. But again, traumas like post-traumatic stress disorder, those come from memories of past trauma. So it's important to understand where these core beliefs are coming from. Again, it's not something that we have control over. They're coming from our childhood and from these childhood memories. So it can be memories of abuse, physical, mental, emotional abuse that we've suffered. It can be discrimination, teasing, bullying, or neglect, emotional neglect from parents, just not getting that emotional bond that we needed with our parents. Again, it can be one of these causes. It can be multiple causes. It might not be any of these causes. But again, for most people with BDD, there is some childhood trauma that has been one of the causes of the BDD symptoms. It's important to realize also that memories from the past become embedded in our limbic system. And the limbic system, again, is the part with the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala. That's the part of our brain storing memories, storing negative experiences. and positive experiences too, because again, we can have positive core beliefs as well about the world and about ourselves. And we'll come more into that when we come into the homework. But what I want you to think about also is that our core beliefs cause feelings of deep shame, social anxiety, and depression. And that's coming from David Veal, who studied this. So again, it's not our fault. It's not your fault having these negative core beliefs. A lot of times they're coming from memories of past traumatic experiences, much like I described earlier with my mother kind of comparing me to my father being very emotionally abusive to her. And so again, having that memory of my father's abuse, the yelling, the screaming, the dysfunctionality that I grew up with between my parents, but then also having my mom go, well, you know, you have to be careful with your emotional outbursts that you're not acting like your father. That was like the core issue for me, is like, oh my God, my mom is rejecting me because she's telling me I'm acting like my father and she hates my father. So there must be some part of her that hates me too. And it got just embedded in me that, you know, I'm fatally flawed. I'm genetically flawed like my father. And this wasn't a conscious belief. It was subconscious. It was just the connections I made as a child. And somehow it just made sense to me, is like, oh, that's why my mom's saying that, because there's some part of her that she, you know, there's some part of me that she's rejecting. There's some part of me that she really dislikes, that's repulsing her because it reminds her of my father. And I was like, oh, what do I do with that? As a child, what do you do with that when you feel your mother is rejecting you? And I buried it, right? It was a subconscious thing, but it was a core belief of mine that I really feel like my BDD was a Band-Aid that came on top of that really deep emotional scar that had developed within me. As I mentioned, part of my recovery was identifying that really negative core belief and countering it. And this took years, and it took some therapy, and it took a dream I had, actually, where the crux of the dream when I woke up, and I did record this in my journal, but the crux of the dream when I woke up was, I don't have my father's flaws, I have my own. And once I realized I had my own flaws, they weren't genetically predetermined, then I knew I could change myself. And I have been changing myself, and I continue to change myself, because it's an ongoing process throughout our lives, is changing ourselves. But it released me from that core negative belief. And then I felt like, now I've recovered from the BDD. Now I can't go back, because now I know that I can fix myself and I can change myself and I can accept myself and forgive myself for you know, all the negative stuff I've thought about myself and I've believed about myself, and some of the negativity from my parents. I can forgive them. So I think it's super important to be able to at least identify some of these negative core beliefs, even if right now it may not be the right time to get rid of them. There's always the ability to counter them and to understand where they're coming from, and to identify our inner critic, which is what part of the homework will be. So here are some of the common negative core beliefs for people with body dysmorphic disorder. You may recognize some of them already. You may be able to identify them after doing some of the homework. But this was one for me. This is probably one of the biggest ones for people with body dysmorphic disorder, is I am unlovable. But it can also be I am a failure, I am inadequate, I am flawed, I don't belong, I am worthless, I am disgusting, I am hideous, I am ugly, I am pathetic, I am wrong. The amazing thing to a lot of therapists and people who treat people with BDD is the amount of abuse, just terrible, terrible, awful, negative things that people with BDD will say about themselves. And a lot of them have to come up as these negative core beliefs. So it's really awful. It's awful the way people with BDD just abuse themselves. The issue, I will say before going on, though, is a lot of this has to do with the previous abuse that a lot of people with BDD have suffered, however. So this is coming from kind of a childhood experience that then becomes internalized. What I wanted to mention is an example from my book, The BDD Family, Coping with Body Dysmorphic Disorder in a Peer Support Group. What was amazing to me is, first of all, the amount of disclosure that people talked about, because this was an anonymous forum. People didn't have to use their real identities. So there was a lot of personal disclosure of really sensitive information, really personal information. And then also the level of support that people gave one another. There was also a lot of support shared. That really reinforced for me the importance of social support in a peer support group. And one of the main reasons I started my Recovery from BDD peer support group during the pandemic was really understanding the force for good that a peer support group can do. So this is a post by somebody who was commenting on his weak jawline. He and another gentleman who were replying to each other, kind of giving each other empathy about how difficult it is to be a man with a weak jawline. This is an excerpt from his post. What is the real core belief driving my BDD? I don't hate my jawline because of my jawline. I hate it because of what it symbolizes, that I am not sexually attractive to women, that I am not one of those men that women look at and feel sexually attracted to. I have no idea why that is such a huge deal to me, but it is. And that's really the core of my BDD, a feeling that my ugly, dorky face makes me a valueless pariah in the sexual marketplace. Those are the truly painful emotions underneath it all. So here's a gentleman who's really examining, not only really, he understands that his jawline really isn't the problem for him. He really is getting at those negative core beliefs that he has about himself. So we're going to use that as an example to really look at how to get at one's negative core beliefs. Sabine Wilhelm and therapists who treat people with BDD using cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, talk about using a downward arrow technique. So basically, it looks at the negative beliefs, and we've already looked at in workshop 2 some of the negative thoughts that you have about yourself. So you've already done some work on understanding some of the negative BDD thoughts that you have. So this is taking those negative BDD thoughts and using a downward arrow technique to really get at the core beliefs that are really underlying those maybe more superficial appearance thoughts. Now, when I say superficial, I do not mean that they're unimportant, that they're not causing you a lot of anxiety and depression and shame and a lot of emotional distress, but I'm simply saying that those are appearance-based thoughts, and it's really important to kind of get at that negative core belief that's driving some of those appearance-based thoughts. So after each statement, you would ask yourself, and what is so bad about that? And then you keep repeating that until you can identify the core belief underneath all those negative beliefs. And you ask yourself, so what does this say about me? So here's an example from the gentleman whose post I just shared. I have a weak jawline. Next arrow. My ugly face makes me a valueless pariah in the sexual marketplace. Next arrow. I will never be sexually desired by women. And so what does that say about him? Or how does he feel about himself? I am worthless. One could also maybe add to that, I am worthless as a man, because that's really how he's feeling. Negative common core beliefs, for example, can also be put together with some kind of mistaken, let's say, or all-encompassing beliefs that somehow if someone looked better, then their entire lives would look better, which is simply a false belief. There are many beautiful, objectively beautiful and handsome people in this world who have problems, whose lives are not happy lives, who are not living their best life. But again, people with BDD seem to have this mistaken belief that somehow looking better or fixing that, body, that part of one's body that feels flawed, appearance-wise, will somehow make their whole lives better all of a sudden, or make them feel so much better about themselves, which is simply a false belief. It's putting one's hopes in the wrong place for feeling better about oneself. So, for example, like I said, if I looked better, my whole life would be better. That's a very common mistaken belief that people with BDD tend to have. Another one is I must be beautiful or handsome to be loved and accepted. And again, that can be coming from this feeling of feeling rejected as a child and then looking at, well, my parents value appearance. My mom values appearance. The society we live in values appearance. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe if I looked better, I would feel better. I'd be loved and accepted. I'd feel better about myself. Other people would love and accept me. I'd be sexually attractive to women if somehow this flaw was gone. And so again, coming to what this gentleman on the forum said, my weak jawline makes me worthless as a man. But clearly he feels that way. But we're going to talk about how can you counter that? Once you've identified your negative core belief or beliefs, how do you counter that? Because it's really important to understand that that's not true. It's false. It's a false belief coming from something deep in our childhood that somehow got embedded in our brains, in our memories, that's causing this negative core belief. So first of all is to write down your negative core belief. Once you've identified it or them, there may be more than one that fit the list, it's important to write them down. Next, and again, this is coming from Sabine Wilhelm's book, Feeling Good About the Way You Look. So, for example, for this gentleman who feels like, his weak jawline makes him worthless as a man, we'll just compress kind of all the negative arrow stuff. So, one of the ways he could want some evidence, it's important to using the rational part of one's brain to counter these false core beliefs. So use evidence. Pretend you're a researcher. Let your rational part of your mind come up for you and really step back and think about this from a rational point of view. And it may also be, what do my parents tell me? What do my friends tell me? Think about how other people respond to you and use that as some of your evidence. Or you can do your own research and look at, for example, if, height is an issue. I mean, Tom Cruise, for example, a worldwide, international, mega famous movie star, is short for a man. And that hasn't held him back in his career by any means. Again, use evidence, find research to counter these negative core beliefs. It's very important to do that. All of us have that rational, intelligent side, so we can harness that to counter these negative core beliefs. For example, he might say to himself, I have women friends who say I'm attractive. No women have told me my jawline is weak. There's some evidence to counter his feeling that a weak jawline is going to make him worthless with women or worthless as a man. So you also need to develop new rational beliefs using this evidence that you gather. So rational beliefs need to be realistic. In other words, you need to be able to believe them. Don't have beliefs like, oh, I am the most handsome person in the entire world, or all women are going to fall at my feet when I feel better about myself. It's just not true. I mean, we all know that we're attracted to a certain look and other people are attracted to a certain look, and we may not be their cup of tea. If someone wants someone who has big boobs, blonde hair, and blue eyes, they're not going to be attracted to me. I'm okay with that. I'm not going to change myself drastically just so I can be attractive to a certain segment of guys when I know other guys are very attracted to someone who looks like me. So again, make sure your new beliefs are realistic, right? So for example, what he could tell himself is women date men with jawlines that are not perfect or that are not strong, right? Another one, my worth as a man is not based on my appearance. It's important to understand, we'll do more with this in workshop 5 coming up, but it's important to be able to understand that you're so much more than just whatever appearance flaws you think you have. And people, physical attraction may be the first way that people are attracted to each other, for example, but it doesn't last. And if a relationship is going to happen, a real loving relationship, being able to find someone who really does love you, uh, that takes more than just a strong or weak jawline. It takes who you are as a person, being a kind, compassionate, loving person. That's who someone wants to be in a relationship with, not just someone with a strong jawline. So again, these are the things to really think about. And, you can look at your parents' marriage. You can look at friends who are happily married or in strong relationships and go, really? Is that the only reason that they're together is because so-and-so has blonde hair? Ask yourself, and again, that, and you can ask your friends, what makes you so attractive, to so-and-so? What do you love about so-and-so? And really listen to that. And I can tell you, it's not going to be only their physical features that are listed as the reason someone loves someone else or is in a long-term relationship. So it's important to gather this evidence and also practice and make note of the evidence so that you can counter your negative beliefs and strengthen these new rational beliefs for yourself. Now we're coming to our homework for this week. So our homework this week is to identify your negative beliefs. And again, they may not be your negative core beliefs. If you can get to your core beliefs, that's fine. But sometimes it can be really scary. A lot of times, sometimes it can be looking at your past trauma and what's caused these negative core beliefs. And you may not be ready for that right now. And that's totally okay. But you can probably identify some of your negative beliefs, even if they're not your negative core beliefs. So at least try to identify your negative beliefs using the downward arrow technique. You can try to find your negative core beliefs if you feel you're ready for that. One of my clients actually knew almost immediately from her childhood memories of when she felt that bully. And it wasn't even a bully. It was just a comment that someone made. And when she was socially comparing herself to her teammates, all of a sudden it popped into her head like, I don't belong. I don't fit in. There's something different about me. So, it was that instant thing. And she knew exactly when that happened for her. Now, what I do want you to do is once you've identified some of these negative core beliefs, and perhaps you may know like her, like, oh, it was my father's, negative comments about, my thinning hair. That came up a lot in the forum. And sometimes for some reason, fathers would make these joking comments with their sons, like when they were 16 years old or something about, oh, you might end up like me with thinning hair, balding. And the sons like me, like, were like, oh my God, that might be true. And they took it as gospel when there was no evidence to the contrary. But their father just made this maybe joking comment, and all of a sudden it just stuck with them. So you may already know why you have this negative core belief, or this negative belief, maybe not core belief, but this negative belief. So think about, you're being beat up and you having those negative thoughts that you've already identified in workshop 2. And maybe now you've identified some of these negative beliefs that you have about yourself that have to do with your appearance, that might have to do with who you are as a person, that's causing you a lot of shame and depression and guilt. It's really important to be able to label that inner critic so that you can actually yell back at that critic, or you can tell that critic you're wrong, or that was hurtful, or you shouldn't have said that because that's not true, right? So you can think about how you want to name that negative inner critic, because for people with BDD, they have a very strong, like I said, negative inner critic, which will tell them terrible things about themselves, right? I'm ugly, I'm worthless, women will never date me, stuff like that. So try to name that inner voice that comes up for yourself. So you can call it the BDD bully. I had a client who just called it the BDD bully. You can call, if you want to think back to maybe an uncle or someone who, made negative comments about you or criticized your appearance, and all of a sudden that's when the BDD kind of started for you. Maybe you want to name the inner critic that person. So like terrible Ted or bossy Betty, give that inner critic a name. It can be at the actual person who caused some of this, appearance related trauma to happen for you. or it can simply be a name that feels like it fits that negative voice in your head. Then I also want you to create a new name to counter that inner critic. So think about this as the part of yourself that you really value and admire. So, if you're artistic, if you're intelligent, if you, for example, for me, I have a PhD, I have a client who's a doctor. So again, you can, talk about, nice Nick, the person who is going to talk in a nice way about who you are and counter that negative inner critic and that core belief with that evidence to the contrary. It can be like Dr. Ruth, like, like I said, this one client of mine was a doctor. So, felt like that rational part and the part that he valued was the part that worked with patients as a doctor. That was his higher person that he really liked and trusted and admired as, the person he had become. I put Eve down here because Eve is the Americanized version of Eva. And I always felt like Eva was very foreign. There weren't a lot of Evas around when I was growing up. So I always felt like my dad is from Austria. And I always felt like a foreigner. I didn't feel like I fit in. And so for me, Eve was like the Americanized version. I just thought, Eve, I just got this vision of someone who is so feminine and so, just so confident and yes, beautiful and everything that I wanted to aspire to. And I just felt like that's the inner part that I really love, is this Eve, this beautiful, feminine, wonderful, kind person. So again, whatever you feel, whoever you feel, it can be your name as a nickname. It can be your name if you really, want to use your name. It can, whatever you want. But I want you to really name that inner part of yourself that you really feel good about, that you can use to counter that negative voice, that negative inner critic. So again, I want you to develop evidence to counter your negative beliefs and reinforce the rational do beliefs about yourself. In the homework this week, I want you to post your inner critic name or names. If you can't settle on one name, you can certainly come up with a few and then either ask for feedback or just say, these are the different names that I came up with for my inner critic. I couldn't settle on one. And then also your new name, whatever your new name or names are for that really part of yourself that you really value, the rational part of yourself. Your bonus, you don't have to do this because I understand that it can be triggering and you may not want to share this out with everyone, including me or anyone else. It may just be something you want to keep inside or in your journal or whatever. But I want, if you feel that you are able to only without being triggered, please, you can also share your negative beliefs and your new beliefs about yourself. But again, only do that if you feel like you're okay sharing that with the group. If you're not, by all means, just focus on the name for your inner critic and your new name that you want to use to really reinforce who you are and who you want to become. Thank you. I appreciate you coming. And if you have any questions about the workshop for homework, you can let me know. Please email me at eva@recoveryfrombdd.com.